Today, I'm going to tell you about the time that I, as a Christian, willingly visited a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall. Now, my channel's grown a lot in the last year or so, so I have no idea how many of you guys know my background, but this is how I got started in ministry. And interestingly, how I even got out of the New Age. There's a whole story on that. I will leave the link in the description of this video if you want to check that out. But long story short, this was my beginning years in ministry, and I learned a lot witnessing to Jehovah's Witnesses, not just theology. I learned a lot about their religion. I also learned a lot of people skills. I learned what not to do and what to do. I was very, very passionate about reaching Jehovah's Witnesses. I was meeting with them for about a year, and during this year, I went to the Kingdom Hall many times. And I've gone to their memorials and conventions numerous times as well. But I'll give you the first impression that I had of the typical Sunday service at a Kingdom Hall. If you're not familiar with Jehovah's Witness theology or beliefs, I have an entire series here on my channel that breaks down many of Jehovah's Witnesses' teachings. I will not be going over all of that in detail here in this video because that's not the purpose of this video. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link to the series in the description. And this is just a suggestion, but one video I did on them in particular is about mind control. Before I talk about any of the theological differences and beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, I always like to start with mind control because it explains so much about how and why they think the way they do and why it's so hard to reach them. Now, before I even start, I'm kind of bummed that I even have to say this, but I know that there are some people out there right now who might be wondering why I would even do this. And you're pretty upset that I would even step foot into a Kingdom Hall. This has been my struggle my whole Christian walk. I crave wisdom, proper and correct information, and I'm genuinely curious to understand other perspectives so that I can be a better witness of Christ. All of that, and I can't not love them. I want to take the time to understand other religions and perspectives to the best of my ability because they matter too. I want to accurately articulate the opposing views of people with whom I disagree with. I would want the same done to me. I see this as wise education. I genuinely love the Jehovah's Witnesses, even if I think they have dangerous and horrible theology. So if it bothers some that I do these things and try to model an uncompromising stance on Jesus and the Bible, but do it with respect, then I don't know what to tell you. I'm gonna keep doing it. So guys, I have a love for the lost, and the Jehovah's Witnesses are lost. My job as a disciple of Christ, as a servant of Christ, is to share the gospel with everyone, and that includes them. So I invite them in my home. I understand their religious lingo, so I can speak to them in a way that they can understand. It's effective. This involves me researching their religion. It involves me humanizing them to be more equipped to effectively reach them. So that's why I visited their Kingdom Hall. And by the way, when I do my video on visiting a Mormon ward, I'll give this same exact reason for why I went. Anyway, getting into it, these are my first impressions and interesting tidbits of when I visited a Kingdom Hall. First, this is very different than the time I visited a psychic, as I had conflicting beliefs then, but this time I was going for research. Jehovah's Witnesses go to service several times a week, so I went to the Sunday meeting. The buildings are very small and modest, especially compared to your average church, and they do this on purpose. Now, in case you don't know much about Jehovah's Witnesses, they're very militant about attending service. It's a big deal if you don't attend each week or you don't go out to your door-to-door duties. Though I'm sure they've had to make some big changes since COVID, it hasn't stopped them from finding other creative ways to reach people, like sending us letters in the mail. Yes, this is an actual letter from Mike. This is saying something, guys, because I've been blacklisted for a while. I might just write him back. So when I walked in, I noticed right away that it was small, but there's also no windows. There's no crosses in a kingdom hall at all, no religious symbols. They believe the cross is a pagan symbol, so they don't want any of that in their kingdom hall. I expected that, but they also don't want anything to do with what they call Christendom, which is basically a derogatory term used to describe us. All aspects of Christianity outside of their religion. So stained glass windows, pictures, or anything that resembles a typical church, they want nothing to do with. A lot of cultural Christianity wants to kind of look more like the world, but the Jehovah's Witnesses are the other extreme. They want to look extremely different from the world, and in the process, have made them into possibly the most legalistic and rigid religion on earth to achieve this. Also, I was told to dress up. Women wear dresses and dressed modestly as well. All the men were dressed in a suit and tie or with nice slacks and dress shirts. There was no area for kids either, at least at the Kingdom Hall that I went to. So the children stay with the parents the whole 2 hours. So we went in, sat down, found a seat, and the service started. And the service isn't called a sermon, but a talk, a meeting or a public discourse. And what they do is give a public Bible talk by an elder, not a pastor. They don't have a singular person that gives the talk at the meetings, but they rotate elders. I believe they call it a chairman that will introduce the subject that's being talked about today and who the speaker is. Then they would give an hour-long talk. And I don't remember the particular talk that day, but I do remember the study afterwards, which I will get to in just a minute. Sometimes they do a review session of the actual talk afterwards, but in my case, I don't recall them doing this with the actual subject. After the meeting was done, they sang a song, they prayed, and then they did an hour-long study of the Watchtower Study Edition. This is different than the one that they would give to the public. When they were doing this, the closest example I could give to people is like a Bible study before the sermon. So like before the sermon would start at a regular church, you would all meet together before the service. You would talk about the Bible, talk about certain passages, then go to the actual sermon with the pastor. It's similar, except it's turned around. They give the talk, then afterwards they do their study. But it's very different than a Bible study. This is more of a Watchtower study that uses the Bible as a prop. Every good, faithful, obedient witness will know what they're going to go over because they were given a study the week before that they were supposed to do. They were expected to do it. And it reminded me much like homework. You were expected to do it and report back on Sunday. I did not do my homework. I was there observing. So it was very interesting to take mental notes on this. Basically, it would be questions from the Watchtower study, and witnesses would raise their hands to answer. What I found interesting is there were no open-ended answers. You must repeat the answers that were given in your Watchtower study that week. So they'll have paragraphs that you're supposed to read. And from that paragraph are questions at the bottom. You are to answer in the way the paragraph formed the answer. Something else I noticed was the Bible was hardly used. Like I said, it was more of a prop. The main focus was on the Watchtower Study magazine that they had. And this is true even when they came to our home and we would meet together, but at the Kingdom Hall, I could see, obviously more people. I looked around and everyone's magazines that they had and reasoning books from the scriptures, the little booklets that they carry around with them, they were tattered and marked up, but their Bibles were sharp and clean. They are much more familiar with the Watchtower's teachings than they are with their Bibles. What they do is what I would call the Bible plus. So it's the Bible, you have it there, but it's plus the Watchtower magazines. It's never the Bible alone. So throughout the whole 2 hours, and I'm watching and observing, the feel was that it was very solemn. The music was very simple, nowhere near the hymns or worship music that you would normally hear at your average church. They have their own songbook as well. The songbook is made by Jehovah's Witnesses for the Kingdom Hall. People solemnly saying there was no hand raising or actual worship going on. It was really funny at one point. Actually, this didn't happen during my first visit, but during a later visit, I had a Jehovah's Witness friend that I went with, and they sneezed in the middle of service. That may not mean much to some of you, but it is a big no-no in the Jehovah's Witness religion to say, bless you, after someone sneezes. They consider it to be demonic. It's like she instinctively knew that I might say that, so she immediately said, excuse me, right away to save me from saying out loud and probably to save her from being embarrassed that I would have said that to her. Now, towards the end of service, I'm watching this all play out, and I'm kind of looking around, because they're raising their hand and you look back to see who it is. I couldn't help but notice that there was a room in the back that was closed off from the rest. And it was separated by a glass window. And what it reminded me of was like the family room that you'd see at some churches, except this wasn't a family room. It was for the shunned deplorables that were disfellowshipped. Now, I had an inkling that might have been what it was, but I remember I'm with my friend and I'm like, who's back there? What's going on back there? She's like, oh, they're disfellowshipped, and just left it at that. They are not supposed to be associated with or even looked at. I'm not sure if every Kingdom Hall is designed with a window room like that, but the one in my town was. These are the Jehovah's Witnesses that have done something to get themselves disfellowships, and now they're trying to earn their way back into the good graces of Jehovah's organization. One way for them to do that is not to miss any of the services. And guys, I couldn't help it. What a torture it must be to stare through that window and see your friends and even family, and they won't even look at or talk to you. There were a few people in there, a few men and I think a few women. And I remember reasoning that because I wasn't a Jehovah's Witness myself, then I could wave and I could smile at them. And I briefly did on my way out, and one even smiled back. Also, something that the speaker mentioned, they pride themselves in not taking a formal offering. They say that it's unscriptural and they prefer to have collection boxes at the back of the hall. I can't be too sure if there was a few things that weren't said that day, because if there were new people in there, they were just trying to express how different they were from other churches and the world in general. Now, what was interesting was after the meeting was over, I was apparently the shiny new toy. They probably thought I was likely to be a new convert because they apparently were the happiest people alive the first time I went. They were overly friendly. They were more than happy to welcome me. Like there was this one woman who was just over the top almost. She was just, I'm so happy to be part of Jehovah's organization. I'm so happy you're here. And just kind of talking about how she has found the truth. And that's also the other word that they call Jehovah's organization. They're Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're in the truth is what they'll call it. I think maybe the third time or so I went, they were catching on. I'm probably not going to become a Jehovah's Witness. Those times I got no such treatment, which is okay. I just thought it was very interesting the first time I went. And the woman I was meeting with was married to an elder, and I got the impression that they didn't want to waste their energy on someone that didn't have the potential to convert. They were still very kind to me, but I was really there to learn about the religion and research it so I could reach them. And honestly, guys, it proved to be very fruitful. So that was my adventure, and I would do it again. Now, before this video ends, I want to be clear and say something very, very important. I am not sitting here saying that every Christian needs to go visit a Kingdom Hall, especially one that is new in the faith or isn't equipped to enter into that kind of situation. I was ready, willing, equipped, and knew exactly what I was walking into and did it for good reasons. And it ended up being a very fruitful thing for me and sharing the gospel effectively with Jehovah's Witnesses. I like to revisit this time in my life often to remind myself that there are people that are in bondage of strict legalistic religion. They know nothing of the love of God. They are stuck with rigid religious rules, and they'll never be able to follow them, And it's a reminder to me of the power of the gospel and that Jesus can indeed free them from this bondage. So that's all I got for this right now, guys. That was a good stretch. That was such a good stretch. I kind of like this series. I like talking and sharing these kinds of stories. I actually want to share more. I like sharing this stuff. I think that it can be helpful and edifying. And I want to share the story of when I went to a Mormon ward, which is a church, but they call it a ward. I went to a Sean Bowles event. There's a point where I would even like to go to California and visit Bethel. I would like to go to North Carolina and visit Elevation. Down here in Albuquerque, there's the Center for Action and Contemplation that Richard Rohr is at. So when that opens, if it ever does open, I would like to go visit that and document the trips. So we'll see if that even happens at this point, because I know that's a lot of work, but I don't know. I enjoy this. I enjoy sharing this stuff with you guys, and I hope you find it edifying and educational.